Vivian, you're a big Thin Lizzy fan, as I am myself, and I got to ask you a couple questions about Thin Lizzy. I mean, you grew up with them and stuff. You got a chance to see the band towards, I would say, their decline after Robertson left the band and Gary Moore stepped in. Do you have like a favorite period for Thin Lizzy and a couple of favorite albums?
Yeah, I do. Well, obviously the classic lineup made some great records. You know, Johnny the Fox was a big album for me. Jailbreak obviously was a standout record, but the era, I mean, and Live and Dangerous, sorry. I mean, so staying with the classic lineup of Robertson and Gorham on guitar, those two studio albums obviously, and Live and Dangerous with that lineup was a seminal record for me. But to be honest, I'm such a Gary Moore fan that when Gary went back to the band for the last time for the Black Rose album, that's one that I really, really love. Only because there's so much fire and passion in Gary Moore's guitar playing that that's really what draws me in. I mean, aside from the band's talent and Phil Lynot's unmistakable talent and gifts as a songwriter and a lyricist, I mean, Black Rose itself, the title track, is just an epic, you know, lyrically and musically, and it really resonates with me as an Irishman because it relates so much to Irish history. But Gary Moore, man, he just did it for me. Gary, when I heard Gary play, the difference between Gary Moore and every other guitar player on the planet, as far as I'm concerned, is that when Gary played, he meant it. He never just phoned it in. He wanted to kill his fucking guitar, and it sounded like he was doing that. He was just such an intense, aggressive guitar player, and that kind of comes through on everything he ever played on. So that really appealed to me in my teenage years, and it still does, you know. And that's still the approach that I like to take when I plug in my Les Paul. I like to hurt it, you know.
It seems like he lit a fire under the band on that album, because that's one of my favorite Thin Lizzy albums too, besides the Robertson era and stuff. And then after that, it was kind of more or less for me downhill a little bit. But they got some good albums after that. Chinatown has some moments and stuff.
Yeah, but you know, Snowy White, with all due respect to Snowy, he's a lovely human being, but he was completely wrong for that band. I don't know why or how he ever ended up there. And my first band, Sweet Savage, like I mentioned at the start of the interview, we toured extensively with Lizzy, and in fact it was during that period when they were promoting the Renegade album with Snowy White, and we did the entire UK and Irish tours with them. And Snowy even said to me, you know, that he looked as I used to watch the show from the side of the stage every single night, and I happened to be stage right, which was the side of the stage that Snowy was on, and he was right about to walk on stage one night towards the end of the tour, and he faked me out. He went to hand me his guitar, and he says, "Hey, would you mind just going on and doing this for me tonight? I really don't feel like it." And at first I thought, yeah, absolutely, Snowy, I'll do it. I know the song. And then he just pulled the guitar away and smiled at me and walked on stage. But he wasn't kidding. He wasn't. I don't think he was ever right for that band, and he knew it. And he was kind of asking himself the same question: "What am I doing here?" You know. So they definitely lost. I mean, to go from Gary Moore to Snowy White was just. I just never saw the correlation.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. Then you had John Sykes afterwards for the.
Well, Sykes is more in the vein of Gary Moore. I think he and I were both the biggest disciples of Gary's playing, and John has that real intensity that Gary had too. But I think that John took him more in a heavy metal direction. His sound is so heavy. I also think that Phil wanted to do that at the time. He was. I actually remember being at a club in North London in 1983 and meeting Phil Lynott at the bar of this place, and he asked me. He said, "Have you heard that new album by Def Leppard, that Pyromania record?" And I said, "Yeah, I think it's great." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "It really makes me feel old." He says, I'm thinking of breaking up Lizzy." And I went, No, you can't do that. You know, please don't do that. He says, "Yeah, I don't feel like we're relevant anymore. I think there's been a shift in the music." And, you know, Phil Lynott was always trying to stay current in what he was doing. And that's why he worked with Midge Ure. At a certain stage, he wanted to bring keyboards in because keyboards were starting to become, synthesizers were starting to become much more prominent in popular music. With the after punk, when it kind of morphed into the new wave movement in the UK, it was very synthesizer driven. So that's why Phil Lynott started to work with Midge Ure and brought him into Lizzy briefly. And I think the same thing in the early 80s when he started working with John Sykes. He wanted to move more into the hard rock, heavy metal kind of direction, away from Lizzy's more organic roots. And it's kind of interesting. I thought that he told me that night that he was so depressed after hearing Pyromania that he was thinking of splitting up Thin Lizzy. That was just so crazy to me, when you think that Lizzy were one of the bands that actually heavily influenced Def Leppard in the first place,
Exactly.
Well, I got a quick question. You mentioned John Sykes, and John Sykes, of course, went from Lizzy to Whitesnake, left Whitesnake, fired, or whatever you want to sit there and say. That whole story is kind of interesting, and you went ahead and replaced him for that tour. I guess my question is, because there's not a lot of information about that era with Coverdale and you. Did you guys ever actually have a chance to start writing some material? Was there anything ever demoed or played?
Yeah, initially what David, he said, if you've got any ideas, put some ideas together and bring them to me. And I did put a few ideas down. I'm not very technically capable, so my demos were appalling, to be honest. I'm also not very confident when it comes to presenting my ideas with people. And so I'm not surprised that he wasn't very impressed by the initial idea or two or three or four that I played for him. But he did have a great rapport with Adrian Vandenberg. And so basically after a few weeks, Coverdale came to the rest of us and said, guys, I'm just going to write this record with Adrian. We've got a thing going on. It's working. And when he told me that, I kind of knew that I wouldn't survive much longer in that band and that there wasn't really a future for me in it, because the way that he wanted to write was not an organic way that I'm comfortable with. The way we wrote the early Dio records we were in a room playing in real time. I had my guitar in my hand. Vinny was there. Jimmy was there. Most of the time, Ronnie was there. But it's kind of the way we made the Heavy Crown album with Last in Line. We just kick around ideas and we'd shape it into something. By the end of the night, we'd have some sort of a structure of the song, or at least the bed of it, the music of it. The way that David wanted to write in Whitesnake was he wanted to do one-on-one, or he wanted you to bring him song ideas. And like I say, I'm technically inept. I didn't have the technical capabilities to demo, to realize my song ideas and bring them to him. So long story short, I mean, I kind of knew that the writing was on the wall, that I wouldn't be in that band much longer, because the other thing was, Adrian Vandenberg, lovely chap, and he and I got along great. We had a lot of mutual respect for each other, personally and professionally, but Adrian made no secret of the fact to me from day one that he wanted to be the only guitar player in Whitesnake, and it was a bit of a conflict for him because David wanted there to be two guitar players in the band, but Adrian just wanted to be the only one. So unfortunately, I kind of suffered the consequences of that when I wasn't writing with the band, and it was just Adrian and David. He obviously had David's ear, and one thing led to another, and it just became a very uncomfortable situation for me, and we ended up parting company. But that's okay, because I knew it was never going to last, because it was never going to be the sort of situation creatively that I could grow into. In that respect, it was very different from the early Dio band.
Well, that being said, and you've mentioned the Riverdogs a couple times now, and I know you've done a couple albums with them, the debut album back in 1990 and World Gone Mad in 2011, both of which I have, so I do have those two albums. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. The singing's phenomenal, and they're just really two good albums. Are you planning on doing anything more with the Riverdogs, or is that something that's just...
It's in the can. We've already done it. Yeah.
Oh, really?
We got together... Frontiers Records, again, the label that Last in Line are on, they called me and asked if I would be interested in doing another record with Riverdogs, but only on the condition that it was a rock-influenced record, very, very much in the vein of the original Riverdogs debut album from 1990 or 91, whatever year it was. So I talked to the other guys, to Nick Brophy and Rob Lamoth, Mark Van Zysen, and everyone signed off on it. So we got together in installments. We started, I think, back in March or April of this year, And you talk about working on a limited budget and time frame. Rob lives up in Hamilton, Ontario. Nick lives in Nashville. Mark and I are still in LA. But Rob and Nick would have to fly in, and we literally have a Monday through Friday. And so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we jammed. We wrote 6 songs, and Thursday, Friday, we went in the studio and demoed them. And then a month or two later, we did the same thing. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we wrote 6 songs. Thursday, Friday, went in the studio and demoed. And then in July, we rented a big drum room in LA, and Mark went in and redid all the drum tracks. In September, during a break in the Def Leppard tour, I went into the studio in Hollywood for, I think we had 3 days, and I did all the guitar tracks, all the rhythms, all the guitar solos. Rob has most of the lyrics done, and in fact, I think as we speak, Rob is at Nick's studio in Nashville doing the lead vocals, and then we'll do all the background vocals and the final mixes in January of next year, and the record will be released sometime about the middle of 2017. And I got to tell you, it sounds great. Actually, it's a guitar intensive record. I mean, there's a lot of guitar in that record.
Well, I'm looking.
Ironically, there's probably even more guitar in that record than there is on the Last in Line album.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing it. Like I said, if you haven't had a chance to hear those 2 albums that you played on, I recommend people out there, if you haven't picked those 2 albums up, pick them up. Great albums, and it's like there's a lot of great music out there that most people haven't heard, and I think the Riverdogs, those 2 albums you played on, are some of those albums that people need to pick up and check out.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, the Riverdogs really was. It was one of those lost gems, I mean, it's just we kind of fell through the cracks of record company policy. I remember the week that our record was released, the original Riverdogs album, we were playing the Roxy in LA, and the new head of the record label, the English guy, he had just come in to LA the week before, and he took us out to dinner right before our debut show for the album, and he basically said, I don't hear it. I don't feel this record. I'd like you to go in and make another one. And our hearts just sank, because we had invested over a year, probably about a year and a half, into writing and recording that record. And just to have this guy come in and say, I don't hear it. So needless to say, it got buried. It just fell off a cliff. And ironically, it goes on to, it won an Edison Award of Rock Album of the Year over in Europe and stuff, and got great reviews and critical acclaim, and sold about 13 copies. So it's just one of those things. C'est la vie.
So Vivian, Last in Line's been touring. They got the new album out. How are the fans reacting to it? I know there's a lot of Dio fans that say, well, they're Ronnie James Dio fans, and then obviously the camps are split between Vivian Campbell and Dio based on what happened back in the early 80s. I don't want to rehash everything because everybody somewhat knows the story about what happened, but I mean, are fans embracing what you're doing with Last in Line? Or
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, anyone who's crazy enough to, everyone's entitled to their opinion. If somebody's bothered enough by any of that shit, they're not going to come to see Last in Line. End of story. It is what it is. And anyone who has come to see and hear Last in Line thoroughly enjoys it, because it's a hell of a band, and we play great music, and we're as close to the Dio experience as anyone's ever going to get now, because you have, although Jimmy has not passed away, you have Vinny and myself, and as far as the story, the bottom line is nobody knows the story except for the 4 people who were in the room back then: Jimmy Bain, Vinny Appice, Ronnie Dio, and myself. We're the only people who actually know the true story, and a lot of people still think to this day that I turned my back on Dio, that I left the band. That is absolutely untrue. I was fired from Dio. I never wanted to leave the band. I was fired in the middle of the Sacred Heart tour. And it left a very, very bad taste in my mouth, because I gave blood, sweat, and tears, heart and soul to that band and to those first 3 records. I worked for nothing. I worked for less than the road crew, because I was working to an end that I had been promised. I was promised by the 3rd album that it would be an equitable situation. And it wasn't about money. It was about principle, because when the 3rd album came along, I was the squeaky wheel. I was the one who went to Ronnie and Wendy Dio, and I said, look, you promised us this when the band started. We've put this work in for years. we need to discuss what was promised to us. And they kept putting it off and putting it off. And then when the time was opportune for them, they fired me in the middle of the tour. And beyond that, they not only fired me, but they propagated the untruth that I had left the band, that I had turned my back on the band. And back then you didn't have Facebook or social media, so short of me going out and spending money I didn't have to hire a publicist, I had no way of refuting those claims that they were making in the press, you know? And it left such a bad taste in my mouth that I totally turned my back on that band, on that music, that entire genre. I wanted nothing to do with it. And it took me many years until I came full circle. And now that I have come full circle, I not only enjoy doing it, but I totally embrace it, and I embrace it as my legacy, because I never thought of it that way back then, because I had Ronnie's name all over it. But Jimmy Bain, Vinny Appice, and myself created those records with Ronnie. It's as much our legacy as it was him. The difference was it had his name on the record, you know, for obvious reasons. I'm not contesting that it should have had that. Obviously, it was going to be called Dio. He was a famous one, but we created that music with Ronnie, and we did it getting paid less than the road crew. And to this day, I have not been paid for the songs I wrote on The Holy Diver. Wendy Dio, I made the mistake of signing my publishing to Wendy Dio, and I'm having to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to try and get my money back from her. So to this day, it still haunts me, you know, but I look at it very, very differently. It's my musical legacy as much as it was Ronnie's, and I'm embracing it, and I'm enjoying embracing it. And if anyone's stupid enough to not come and see a Last in Line show because they're holding on to some old, ancient, misinformed untruth, then that's their loss. You know, I'm having a good time.
Well, I mean, I'm going to recommend people definitely go out and check you guys out, because the album's phenomenal. Yeah, it's got some sounds from Dio, but it's got some influences all over the place. And for me, the album's just got a great sound from top to bottom. It wasn't what I expected. I was expecting more of a Dio-type album, but basically you guys have touched on so many aspects
Plus
of the
Andrew
genre.
kicks ass.
Exactly. Andrew kicks ass. He's a phenomenal singer.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, because, I mean, unfortunately, Jimmy's no longer with us. I mean, but the elements are still there. Is there a possibility that you guys may continue after this album and after this tour, maybe putting out another album possibly?
We will be, yeah. We've started to write already. We'll probably be recording in January, February, March. I don't know when the record will come out, but it'll certainly be written and recorded within the first half of next year. So we do want to make this a going concern.
I mean, I think it's just a great place for you to sit there and just get your freaking inner hard rock, heavy metal guitar playing out, because, I mean, your playing on this album is phenomenal. I mean, you said it was therapeutic in a way, too, when you wrote the album. Do you still feel that way when you go on stage?
It is actually. You know, I've been dealing with this cancer diagnosis for the last 4 years. It's kind of one step forward, two steps back. I thought I was in remission. The cancer came back, did a different set of chemo, went into remission. The cancer came back, did a stem cell transplant, went into remission. The cancer came back. So I'm kind of resigned, and I'm not complaining about it. It is what it is. You know, you take your lumps, you take the good with the bad in life, and I'm fine with it, because cancer is another reason why I've kind of realigned my thinking in life, and I thoroughly, 100% completely enjoy what I'm doing, and I'm so very, very lucky that I've been able to do this for my entire life. It's all I ever wanted to do was play rock guitar since I was a teenager listening to Thin Lizzy. In fact, even before that, when I was 9 years old, I first heard Mark Bolan and T-Rex and knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play guitar and grow my hair. So I'm 54 years of age. I can pay my rent by playing music and writing music and performing music, and it gives me great joy, and I've never enjoyed it as much as I am currently. So it's all good, you know? And I actually think I'm playing better than I've ever played in my life, which I'd like to think, because musicians, unlike athletes, you know, where you peak and then you kind of roll off, as a musician, you just gain more and more experience, you know?
Yeah,
so
I was going to ask you about that. You're playing, like, you're constantly playing. I mean, like you said, you have the cancer, it comes and goes and stuff. This is kind of like almost therapy for you in a way, I would say. You know,
it absolutely is therapy. Yes, it absolutely is. I embrace each and every day and each and every show that I get to perform. You know, being on the road can be very tiring. I'm not saying that I enjoyed all the travel and all the airports and various hotels and whatnot, and the crappy food, but nothing gives me greater joy than to be on stage and to play guitar with musicians that I actually like and get along with. So life is good.
Amen to that. And Last in Line's the name of the band. The new album is called Heavy Crown.
Heavy Crown.
It's out right now on Frontiers Records. You just Google it, you'll find it. You'll see all the songs and everything. Definitely pick it up. So what's the plans? Are you guys are going on a tour right now? I mean, how long is that going to last? And then when are you going to go back with Def Leppard? Is there something on the rise?
Yeah, we start last in line. We do our first show. We're in Seattle tonight. We just have a very limited number of U.S. shows. Unfortunately for this year, we're just doing a half dozen shows on the West Coast over the next week or so. And then we go to Europe for about a month. We're playing Germany, France, Holland, Czech Republic, Poland, the UK and Ireland. And we finish early December. And Leopard will more than likely tour again in the spring of 2017, I would think.
Yeah, I don't see that stopping anytime soon. We do on the Hard Rockology show, we always ask our guests this, Spinal Tap moment. You've had to have numerous Spinal Tap moments on stage or off stage being a musician.
There's been a few, yeah. Probably the most Spinal Tap moment on stage was during the Last in Line tour with Dio in 1984. We had a huge pyramid. Vinny played on top of the pyramid, and the very top of the pyramid lifted off, kind of like the imagery that's on the dollar bill.
Yes.
And so Jimmy and Vinny and I started the show. Stand Up and Shout was the first song, and we would be underneath the top of the pyramid, and they'd feed smoke in there, and the top would come off the pyramid, and then Jimmy and I would walk down the stairs down the front of the stage. Then the stairs would split apart and Ronnie would come out from behind the stairs. Well, this one night the top didn't lift. so the whole thing. So we're in there, they're feeding smoke in there. We can barely breathe. We're playing Stand Up and Shout, and Ronnie's trapped behind the stairs underneath us. So it was a good time. What can I tell you?
Yeah, that's a Spinal Tap moment.
One of many, yes.
All right, Vivian, we want to say thanks for joining us here on the Hard Rockology show.
Thank you. My pleasure. Lovely to talk to you guys.
All right, Vivian, like we talked about earlier, we always have our guest introduce one of the songs off the new album. So go ahead and take it away.
Jimmy Bain wrote some great riffs, and the song that we're about to play was very much a Jimmy Bain riff. We went into the studio one night, and I said, Jimmy, you got anything? He says, yeah, I got this little F sharp riff. And it's a song called Martyr, and it kicks serious ass.